Right, that's audio in, video in. So we've just had, Jeoshy and I that is, had our asses handed to us, quite dramatically, in the Caravonian conflict. It's damn near 3 AM, and this feels like an excellent time to talk about everything wrong with this ship. I don't even know if my computer can handle recording such a beefy monstrosity, but you know what? Let's talk design philosophy and get things out of the way. So, first of all, I mean, yeah, we did have a very impressive initial presentation, and, you know, no surprises there. We did build a very powerful gun. We did our best to make sure that everything was actually viable. You know, we tried to armor it as best we could. As you can see down here, plenty of heavy armor. Because, you know, if you're gonna enter, you should at least try, even if the attempt is a joke. But I want to demonstrate everything wrong with the approach we took, that we knew was wrong with it when we started, and we followed through with it anyway. So without further ado, let's start rambling about random shit. First of all, with a centrally mounted pack, you typically want it, you know, on a vertical swivel, and just let the 30 degrees up and down on the firing piece take care of altitude. Or we could have mounted it on some kind of 2-axis turret, which would have been tricky. But the point is, that would be able to fire at any enemy in any direction, which would actually allow us to, you know, not have issues where the gun pivots all the way under the ship or can't fire or anything stupid like that. We chose to ignore that and mount it, you know, ventrally. What is this? Ventral? Sagittally? Sagittally. Yes, this is a sagittally pivoting gun. And that's not the first problem with a sagittal gun. For starters, have a look at how the barrels are arranged. This is a huge amount of area you can hit anywhere in. You can cripple the particle cannon, or possibly much worse. Considering we're front-siding, having, what is this? I want to guess a 50 square meter area where a cram hit will instantly knock out our main gun. Unwise. The other thing is, because it pivots and the nose doesn't pivot with it, any hits from the side with, for example, heat is going to devastate the gun. And you can hit it from the side, you know, if it's facing straight down in the case of, you know, an aiming error, on quite a large area. And you can also hit it from below if you're behind it, and if it's aiming straight down, you can hit the top armor of the gun too. There's a huge amount of area that's very vulnerable with this design, on a system that's incredibly expensive and comes with a lot of weaknesses that we just have no way to compensate for. Now, that's the gun. The weapon itself is intentionally stupid, but let's talk about the structure of the ship. So for starters, you know, the side weapon, the side armor of the gun is kind of dodgy, but we wanted to armor it as much as we could anyway, so we end up with these huge panel-y pieces, which were mostly just empty space, and that's a problem because we started to hit budget concerns, armoring empty space that never really had anything behind it. We initially had huge particle cannons mounted down here and on the top as well, but we just didn't have the budget for the extra firepower. I changed my mind. We're coming back to the particle cannon. For starters, we're stuck at a 50% focus, which we really don't need shooting at battleships. These are huge thump weapons. Honestly, we want the beams more spread out anyway to get the most out of it. And at the time of designing, thumps still couldn't travel onto sub-objects, remember? So we had no way of damaging turrets with this kind of setup. Unless we hit one directly, and even then it's most likely just going to strip the turret cap, and any internal damage it does, debatable. And on top of that, the overclocking limit, I mean, we managed to just barely, with these, you know, use the energy we had. We'll come back to that later, but the point is, with only thump and explosive as our allowed damage types, I think the top two were impact, the bottom two were explosive. Let's just confirm. We didn't actually have any effective particle weapons that could... Oh no, they're all impact. So even this one? All impact. So not even any explosive. So we could strip huge amounts of armor, but we had no follow-through punch to actually remove any systems we exposed, which you saw regularly. We'd tear out huge chunks of an enemy ship, but could we damage them? not meaningfully. Especially without Pierce, we couldn't knock out engines, we couldn't knock out guns. And, this is a huge investment on something that's basically just doing hit point damage. Now, back to the armored pads. Aside from containing thrusters, let's talk about actually armoring this thing a little bit. So obviously it's going to be shot in the front, and it's going to be hit first because we of course have like a 700 meter range disadvantage against all our enemies. So it needs to be able to take hits to the front. But, being Condobonian, we also have an altitude limit on our airships, so it will be shot from the top, which means we need strong top armor too, or we might just get gimped. And of course, being a hover ship with an altitude limit, we will be shot from below, so we need strong belly armor. And being a huge front-sider, small ships will encircle us, so we need strong side plates as well to defend, the gun and the engines and everything else. And of course, there's a chance we'll be hit from behind. So you'll notice that despite allegedly being a front-sider, the demands of how we intended to use this thing meant that we needed strong armor everywhere, which, as clearly demonstrated, is not something you can have. You can't have 100% armor strength on every facing. And of course it gets worse because most AI cards will target the biggest and baddest thing around, which is this, despite most of its funding being a weapon and thin armor. This wants to be a sniper, but it doesn't have the range to snipe, and it doesn't have the armor to take hits, which is going to attract, by default. So this whole thing was kind of set up to fail. We also struggled to spend how much energy we were actually capable of generating. We had these enormous engines. This is just one of 4 engines. And even with this huge, super inefficient steam setup, we really struggled to actually be able to use our material allowance. It was huge. And you'll notice we didn't cover the thing with, diff APS with heat or anything like that would actually enable us to capitalize, or frag or explosive to capitalize on the holes we made. So this thing, it was a big gun. Named after Sigmund Freud, it was the biggest dick in the tournament. I think I made that joke in the chat towards the end. It was essentially giant compensation, and it was also, ironically enough, borderline impotent. I believe these were Sea-Wiz guns, the maximum number of Sea-Wiz guns allowed on this class of ship. It was supposed to be a battleship, but it didn't meet the length requirement. Ironic for an enormous phallic metaphor. It wasn't long enough. But yeah, here we are. So it was only these side and belly guns that had any follow-through to, make up for the huge weaknesses. Speaking of huge weaknesses, very few turning thrusters, so it, despite, being a sniper that tried to sit above its enemies and blast down through the deck, that's the other thing, it should have been a sniper, but we told it to sit above whatever it could catch, and when it got above it, the gun would, get into all kinds of aiming problems and expose weak armor. And it had no follow-through when it got there, because we limited the number of guns, and all kinds of funny shit would happen with this thing. It was not sensible. Let's see, if I load in, what was it, the God Gun, was that it? No, there was let's say gun platform. This wasn't a finished design, but this was one alternate approach, much smaller, similar particle cannon design, much better armoring scheme, heat missiles, to pop turret caps and exploit armor weaknesses, a huge Sea-Wiz gun to defend it from any missiles that might take it out. This was my initial answer to the long-range sniper design. Far more mobile, far more capable, and we didn't use it because it wasn't funny. It was too try-hardy, and also it wasn't rules compliant because I have bad reading comprehension. While we're here, demonstration keels, because we genuinely did intend this thing to stay afloat by having a giant hydrofoil on it under it, which we didn't follow through with. let's move on to the Exterminatus, my baby. Did I still have it saved as that? Do I have an Exterminatus? Here it is. So this is the Exterminatus Destroyer. Incredibly ugly, made beautiful by Jeoshy's labor. The original was a flying brick. This thing was a serious attempt. However, it was also never that legitimate of a serious attempt for a few reasons. The guns are half diff, half magazine fed, so they're diff guns but with double the fire rate and basically of a diff gun. Just because I like doing it that way, it's cheap, it has a low explosion chance, you can have like 1 million of them. These were designed with extreme redundancy of weapons. There was no redundancy of engines, and a hit up here from above would detonate the ammo capacity, which is why I was so surprised. It almost never gets hit up there from the sides or below. But this thing was designed to be unbreakable. It had thick, thick armor. It had redundant systems everywhere. Nothing would explode. This was the tank of our team. It sits above an enemy ship and fires down into it. And that's my point about unviability coming back, because a tank sitting directly above an enemy ship firing down will not take return fire. We knew this. So this was already, and it's not big enough, so it's not going to attract shells designed for the biggest ship. So this is a tank that won't draw aggro. You know, we knew that going in, and the APS, you'll notice if we access the intakes, is heat, which is great for shooting down through turret caps, which is what we intended this to do. It did really well at it in the first match, crippling enemy systems, but it has no follow-through. It has no ability to crack open compartments, destroy engines, anything that can survive, 250mm heat through the top? Access intakes. How do I do that? Here we go. What is this? 200mm heat. Anything that can withstand that is going to be able to ignore these, and most things did. Actually, redundant engines is a lie. It only has one piston. Notice there's no particle cannon on this thing, even though we knew that it would be sitting above enemies and shooting down into them. It could easily have had an explosive particle cannon, and we chose not to. It also has a very large, powerful engine. It's got far more engine power than it really needs. We could have had 2 redundant steam engines, but we didn't. You know, that may have actually been an oversight. I won't claim that was a design choice to weaken it. But the point is, this was my most serious attempt at a utility ship, but it was providing the wrong kind of utility, and we knew that from the start. Also, as Jeoshy mentioned, you know, dropping just heat, we could have been dropping, 60-degree frag, and we would have had the same effect or better, and actually had some utility with it. Or we could have been dropping thump, we could have been dropping pierce. We went with what was, funny, and restricted it to a roll. And it has glowing eyes. Anyway, that's that for that. Our last ship was the Side Effect, which is Jeoshy's baby. I contributed very little to this except for the fake and misaligned engine jets, which don't look right, you may have noticed. But anyway, this thing is on a whole other level. Where do I even begin with this? We built a plane that was underpowered because, particle cannon, it needs a steam engine. Look how thin it is. It's 3 blocks thick. Like, you can imagine the steam engine that's inside this thing. You can imagine how underpowered this gun is, despite, the meme lenses. And the other thing is, you'll notice it's a plane with 1 wing. It's an asymmetrically weighted plane whose center of mass changes depending on enemy location. It's hilariously underpowered because of the tiny engine. Like, we could have done, anything else. We could have put diff APS underslung and overslung on this thing. We could have put missiles on it. We could have even made it able to actually fly stably. But, you know, we didn't because we were in it for the lols. And, yeah, I think it was pretty funny. They kind of drowned themselves eventually, flying around trying to shoot at things, but that's pretty great. Anyway, let's go back to the big thing. The, what is it? Capital ship or capital airship? I think capital ship. This has more paint, so this must be the newest one. Look at the actual armor that we were able to get on this thing. We had some thickness in the nose, and then internal plates. But that plate is only 2 meters thick because we couldn't afford anything more. And that front piece is what, 3 meters thick? We had 5 meters of metal on our front sider in these compartments. That's, what, half of what you need to stop a 500mm Pierce APS shell? And that's just gunpowder. Like, are rails gonna care? No, and that's what we saw, you know? If we'd really wanted to try hard, we would have built, 5 meters of heavy armor in a nice tight arc, had a centrally mounted gun that could sit back at a distance and just demolish, and we wouldn't have probably used particle cannons at all. We probably would have used our own APS, honestly. Yeah, particle cannons have great armor stripping potential, or they're decent as secondaries in that regard at least, but they don't have the killing potential to take out enemy guns or destroy engines, which I think I've said before. So, there's no follow-through to the intimidation factor. If we'd been allowed to use Pierce, totally different story. The exact same design with Pierce would have been absolutely terrifying. And I agree, particle cannons are very good when you use them in the right role to do the right things, Like, a mix APHE with, I don't know, a first contact surface shell or whatever, or like what would be a better example of a shitty build? Like a Thump HE hybrid shell. APS is a good gun system, but not when you make meme shells with no ability to actually damage enemy systems. So, yeah, we had some fun with it. I think it was really funny to see how people react. I think they misinterpreted this as an extremely powerful and intimidating platform and going hard for the meta and all that other stuff. The reality is that we tried. We tried to make something that was a serious attempt. But, it was serious within the scope of being here, this. This was a good, serious attempt. Have a look at this. The particle cannons are exposed from the side, however it's very small, so you can afford to take them in numbers, and they'll spread out. And they'll likely be facing whatever's going to hit them anyway. It's much, much smaller in cross-section. Look at that. A shell is much less likely to be directed into the particle cannons. A hit from the side will only knock out 1 or 2 of the guns instead of, a seriously larger amount. I believe these were short-range lenses because it was intended to be directly above what it was hitting instead of using long-range lenses. So much more damage. It has heat missiles to knock out systems. Built down to a cost, as you can see, as cheap as possible. It had all this stuff through it for keep the cost low and give it some heat protection. All this is like redundant spaced armor. This thing was built thick. And it was far, far, far more effective as a long-range sniper with Exterminatus vessels moving in on top to screen for it. But, that's not the kind of design philosophy we wanted. It's not the kind of aesthetic choices we wanted, and it wasn't as funny. You know? I think I'm getting off topic, but the important point is big gun. Big gun always wins, except when it doesn't. But even then, you win the real competition. What really matters is having the big gun. I feel like I did too much bitching and not enough joking about it, but like, I hope you can forgive me. It is 3 a.m. and I don't have a ton of energy left. And likely I'm just talking to myself, so I think I will call it there. I'd be amazed if you managed to sit through my incoherent babbling this long. Oh yeah, one last thing. Let's say you dropped a Pierce railgun in from the side. You'd be going through, what is this? 2 meters of metal, and then 1 meter of metal, and then, you know, already able to hit vital thrusters, and then 2 more meters of metal, and then you're in the railgun. Come on, you can put... Surely, you know, a 250mm railgun shell can go through 6 meters of metal. We did not set... And this thing goes into the middle of the enemy fleet too. Like, it's gonna be hit in the side. Pretty much by design, by intention. It's it's a glory... Did I miss a block? Oh, that's embarrassing. Anyway, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's the one other thing. The one other argument I want to make. It sits above its enemy. So its true surface is here. It's actually the fattest broadsider in the competition. Same goes for the Exterminatus. Sitting directly above something, it is a wide boy. So, take that, haters. I'm gonna stop here before I embarrass myself any more than I already have. Yeah. That's video out, and audio out.